At some point, you've gotten in your own way. The question is whether you know why. You've watched yourself do it. Start something and stop. Get close to something good and find a way to ruin it. Commit to a change and quietly abandon it 3 weeks later. Meet someone worth keeping and push them away. Apply for the opportunity and then not send the email. The behavior looks like laziness or fear or bad luck. But psychology has a more precise name for it and a much more uncomfortable explanation for where it comes from. Self-sabotage is one of the most researched patterns in behavioral psychology and one of the least understood by the people living inside it. Because from the inside, it never feels like sabotage. It feels like a reasonable decision, a protective instinct, a gut feeling that something isn't right. The mind that is sabotaging you is extraordinarily good at making that sabotage feel justified. That's what makes it so hard to see. And that's exactly what we're going to look at today. Most people define self-sabotage as doing things that hurt yourself, but that definition misses the most important part. The behaviors themselves, the procrastination, the avoidance, the self-destruction at the worst possible moment, those are symptoms. Self-sabotage, at its root, is a conflict between two parts of the same mind. One part wants the thing, the relationship, the career, the change, the success, and another part, operating largely below conscious awareness, has decided that getting the thing is dangerous. And here's what makes this genuinely difficult. The part that's afraid isn't wrong. It learned its fear from somewhere real, a relationship that ended badly, a time you tried and failed publicly, an environment where success was punished or visibility was dangerous. The protective part of the mind recorded those experiences and made a rule that made complete sense then, and is now firing in contexts where it no longer applies. The sabotage isn't irrational, it's just outdated. Behavioral psychology identifies 5 core patterns through which self-sabotage most commonly operates. You'll likely recognize more than one. The question to hold as you listen isn't just whether you recognize the pattern, it's what the pattern might be protecting you from. The first pattern is procrastination, and not the simple version where you'd rather do something easier. The specific kind of self-sabotaging procrastination is chronic, selective, and almost always aimed at the things that matter most. The things that are least important get done immediately. The things that carry the most weight, the business plan, the difficult conversation, the application, the creative work, those are the ones that get endlessly delayed. The first pattern is procrastination, and not the simple version where you'd rather do something easier. The specific kind of self-sabotaging procrastination is chronic, selective, and almost always aimed at the things that matter most. The things that are least important get done immediately. The things that carry the most weight, the business plan, the difficult conversation, the application, the creative work, those are the ones that get endlessly delayed. The psychological mechanism underneath is almost always one of two things: fear of failure or, and this one surprises people, fear of success. Because if you never fully try, you never fully fail. The procrastination creates what psychologists call a self-handicapping buffer, a built-in excuse that protects the ego. I didn't fail, I just didn't really try. As long as the important thing stays undone, the possibility that you could have succeeded remains intact. Procrastination is often the mind's way of protecting a dream by never testing it against reality. The second pattern shows up in relationships, specifically in the way some people consistently choose, create, or maintain dynamics that hurt them. This isn't about bad luck in love or work, it's a pattern. The same kind of person appears again and again. The The same dynamic plays out in different relationships with different people. The same ending arrives somehow every time. What drives this pattern is almost always an unconscious model of what relationships are supposed to feel like. If the emotional template formed in early life was built around inconsistency, chaos, or conditional love, then stable, secure, available relationships feel wrong, foreign, even boring, not because the person doesn't want them, but because the nervous system doesn't recognize them as love. It recognizes the familiar tension, the push and pull, the uncertainty, and it mistakes that recognition for connection. The third pattern is numbing, using something to reduce the volume on an internal experience that feels too loud to sit with. This isn't limited to substances. The numbing agent can be overworking, overeating, scrolling, gaming, spending, exercising to excess, anything that reliably interrupts a feeling before it can be fully experienced. And the feeling being avoided is almost never what it appears to be on the surface. The numbing works in the short term. That's exactly why it persists. But what it prevents isn't just the discomfort, it prevents the information that the discomfort was trying to deliver. Emotional discomfort is almost always signal, not noise. It's pointing at something that needs attention, adjustment, or change. Numbing silences the signal. The underlying situation remains unchanged. The volume of the discomfort slowly increases. The numbing needs to increase to match it. This is the loop. The fourth pattern is self-criticism, the internal voice that evaluates every action, every output, every performance against a standard that was never designed to be met. This isn't the same as having high standards. High standards drive completion. Perfectionism driven by self-criticism prevents it. Because the work is never good enough to release, the relationship never feels secure enough to invest in. The plan never feels complete enough to execute. The psychological root of sabotaging perfectionism is usually shame, specifically a belief that imperfection equals unworthiness. If what I produce is flawed, then I am flawed. So the protection strategy becomes never produce anything that could be judged, or produce it and immediately attack it before anyone else can. The self-criticism isn't a standard of quality, it's a preemptive strike against the judgment that the person fears is coming from the outside, delivered instead from the inside, where at least it feels controlled. The fifth pattern is the quietest and perhaps the most widespread, simply not moving. Not procrastinating exactly, more accurately, choosing the familiar with such consistency that growth becomes structurally impossible. The same job for years past when it stopped being fulfilling. The same social circle that stopped challenging years ago. The same city, the same routine, the same version of the day, repeated with slight variation until the repetition itself becomes invisible. The mechanism here is the nervous system's baseline preference for the known over the unknown, even when the known is actively causing suffering. At least the suffering is familiar. The brain can predict it, prepare for it, manage it. The unknown contains unpredictable risks, and unpredictable risks feel far more threatening than known pain. So the person stays, not because the situation is good, but because the cost of leaving feels higher than the cost of remaining, until the cost of remaining becomes undeniable, and by then, far more has been lost than the original risk would have required. 5 different patterns, 1 common root. What connects procrastination, self-defeating relationships, numbing, perfectionism, and comfort zone entrenchment is a single underlying mechanism. The mind assessing a situation and concluding, at a level below conscious reasoning, that the cost of change is higher than the cost of staying the same. And that assessment is almost always based on outdated data. on experiences from an earlier version of your life, in an earlier version of your circumstances, with an earlier version of your resources. The mind that learned to protect you in one context is applying that protection in a completely different one. And because it operates below conscious awareness, it doesn't update automatically. It needs to be shown that the threat has changed, or that the threat was never as large as it was recorded to be. This is why awareness matters, not as a cure, but as the beginning of a correction. A few things worth saying clearly. First, awareness alone does not stop self-sabotage. Knowing the pattern doesn't automatically break it. What awareness does is create the gap, the same gap we've talked about before, the space between the impulse and the action where a different choice becomes possible. Without awareness, there is no gap. The pattern runs automatically. With awareness, the gap exists. What you do with it is still entirely up to you. Second, the goal is not to eliminate the protective response. The part of the mind that learned to keep you safe deserves a degree of respect. It did its job. The goal is to update its information, to show it through repeated experience that the threat it was responding to either no longer exists or is survivable in ways that weren't available before. This happens slowly. It happens through action taken despite the fear, not in the absence of it. And third, the most reliable signal that self-sabotage is active is a very specific feeling, a sudden surge of urgency to do something other than the important thing, to clean the apartment instead of making the call, to research instead of write, to sleep instead of decide. That urgency isn't motivation, it's the protective system activating. Recognizing it as such is not a small thing. It's the difference between being run by the pattern and having the option, however uncomfortable, to step through it anyway. The mind that sabotages you is not your enemy. It's a system that was built to protect you, and that system has been doing its job consistently, often at great cost to the life you actually want. The work isn't to fight it, it's to understand what it's protecting, whether that protection is still needed, and what becomes possible when you're no longer organized entirely around avoiding the thing you're afraid of. Most people never ask those questions. They just call it bad luck, or fear, or personality, and the pattern keeps running, quietly, efficiently, invisibly, for years. The next video goes into the psychology of people who never feel like enough, why the internal standard keeps moving, why achievement doesn't fix it, and what's actually driving the feeling underneath. If today's video recognized something in you, that recognition is where the work begins. Subscribe, and I'll see you there.